is still the longest of long shots, but there could yet be indictments in this country of Donald Trump and Rudy Giuliani for their conspiracies with Russian operatives, because the evidence that the Hunter Biden Burisma story is the product of the GRU, Russian military intelligence, and the evidence that it might yet claim Giuliani and our Hitler exploded yesterday when the government of Ukraine indicted on charges of treason a member of its own parliament, a former member of its own parliament, and a former national deputy prosecutor general, accusing them of being part of the Russian intelligence spy network inside Ukraine, inside the previous Ukrainian government, and of working with the Russians and Giuliani to falsely fabricate the Biden Burisma investigation that Trump tried to blackmail President Zelensky into. It appears to be too much to hope that Giuliani will be charged in Ukraine or that this country would extradite him there. On the other hand, until these startling indictments were handed down in Kyiv, it appeared that Trump's entire labyrinthine scheme involving untold nefarious elements of Russian society had been completely buried. But the Trump-Russia investigation has now thrust an arm out of its grave, like at the end of the movie Carrie, and it seems to be looking for Trump. But it is closer to Giuliani, and it might even be seeking out House Oversight Chairman James Comer. The prosecutor indicted for treason is named Konstantin Kulik. He wrote the 2019 memo, apparently made up out of whole cloth, suggesting that his country should investigate Hunter Biden and his work while a member of the board of the Ukrainian energy company Burisma. The current member of parliament indicted is Alexander Dubinsky, the ex-member Andrei Derkach, and the latter two were considered so dirty, so in league with Russian spy and intelligence operatives, that Derkach was sanctioned by the U.S. Treasury Department in September 2020, during Trump's presidency, 2 months before the election. With Trump's acquiescence or negligence or something, his own government accused this guy Derkach of, quote, waging a covert influence campaign centered on cultivating false and unsubstantiated narratives concerning U.S. officials in the upcoming 2020 presidential election, spurring corruption investigations in both Ukraine and the U.S. designed to culminate prior to Election Day. Now we know what that was. The Trump Treasury Department said this about Derkach, and 4 months later, just before Trump left office, his Treasury Department also sanctioned that still-serving Ukrainian parliament member Dubinsky on the same charges. And a year ago next month, Derkach was indicted by the U.S. Justice Department. Now, the reason this could wind up touching the Congressman Comer, chairman of Oversight, no man more skilled at oversight than Comer, is that the disinformation appears to be ongoing. Just last May, Derkach, the ex-parliamentarian now charged with treason in Ukraine, leaked recordings of conversations between Joe Biden and Ukraine's former president, recordings that suddenly and mysteriously appeared after Comer asked if an informant had such recordings. The problem for Comer now is that the man who had those recordings has just been indicted by Ukraine for treason and for being a Russian spy, and specifically for being part of the effort to poison the 2020 American election with misinformation. And little Jamie Comer, who is just stupid enough to have done this unintentionally, helped to distribute the disinformation that got this guy indicted for treason inside this country. The treason indictments do not include charges more recently than 2019, but the wording leaves on the table for future action the newer parts of what all the evidence suggests is a years-old pipeline of Russian attempts to manipulate our country. In the future, if there is a future, we will probably find out that Trump was guiltier of conspiracies and collusions and infiltrations with and by Russia than we ever suspected. We just didn't know the street map well enough. And if you find yourself defending the reality that Trump was never cleared of coordinating with Russia on the 2016 election, to say nothing of the 2020 election, or for that matter, the 2024 election, just remember that the man whose magic act, watch me make collusion disappear, was Trump's hand-picked Attorney General William Barr. Trump's ongoing second biggest lie, that he was, quote, proved innocent, depends entirely on Bill Barr. And last month, Trump said he, quote, called Bill Barr dumb, weak, slow-moving, lethargic, gutless, and lazy, a rhino who couldn't do the job. Bill Barr is a loser. Hey, moron. Bill Barr is also Trump's only Russian alibi. In the trials of our Hitler that are already on the 2023-24 season schedule, Fani Willis has dropped a bombshell, and not necessarily a positive one. At, of all things, a Washington Post Global Women's Summit, the Fulton County DA says she is confident there will be a trial, and quoting her, "I believe the trial will take many months, and I don't expect that we will conclude until the winter or the very early part of 2025. So the winter of 2024-25, before the Georgia case ends. Take your pick of unprecedented scenarios. The Republican nominee for president on trial during debate season. The Republican nominee for president on trial during the closing weeks of the presidential campaign. The Republican nominee for president on trial on Election Day. And in the nightmare construction, the case going to the jury when the defendant has already turned into the president or dictator-elect. Or, of course, he could have lost, and the case would be going to the jury while he is insisting to his cult that the election was rigged and Atlanta was part of it, and urging them to storm the Fulton County Courthouse. There's also more from what was a much larger leak of the Atlanta video proffers than we knew at this time yesterday. ABC did not get all of those leaks. The Washington Post got more from two other plea deal defendants, Ken Chesbrough and bail bondsman Scott Hall, and it got more details from the suddenly remorseful Jenna Ellis. Twice during the recording of the proffer, prosecutors stopped Ellis from details that she was recounting. Both times, prosecutors explained they were very worried she might be violating attorney-client privilege. But she said enough to suggest that there are two new tendrils to the case of the Trump 19 in Georgia, at least new to us civilians. Ellis mentioned one of the Atlanta attorneys who handled Trump's attempts to steal the Georgia vote, Preston Halliburton, and also a local GOP lawyer in Georgia, Ray Smith. She said the two had obtained security footage from the ballot tabulation center at the State Farm Arena in Atlanta. And on that footage were the county election worker Ruby Freeman and her daughter Shay Moss, the victims of the Giuliani-led smear campaign, the one not directed at President Biden. She was just about to explain on the proffer what and why, and especially how, the security footage when prosecutors stopped her. Talk about your dead arms bursting out of the grave to clutch at Rudy Giuliani. Ellis's other revelation stopped in progress raises the possibility that there was another conference call about fake electors that we didn't know about. Fake electors from Pennsylvania. She said she was asked to join a call on December 7th, 2020, with Boris Epshteyn and Mike Roman, two Trump attorneys, and Giuliani, and several people who were supposed to be fake electors from Pennsylvania. The Pennsylvania fake electors avoided indictment in that state. But if there was a conference call with Giuliani and Epshteyn and Ellis and Roman with them, that might just change. Two other brief Trump developments before we get to Fight Club congressional chapter and a story that is simultaneously farcical and supportive of the idea that Trump's addiction to violence is taking root in American politics. As expected, the impossibly named state judge in Michigan, James Robert Redford, has ruled on the efforts to disqualify Trump there under the 14th Amendment, and he did more or less what was done in Minnesota. Rule that there is clearly nothing in the 14th Amendment that can keep Trump off the Michigan primary ballot. And as to the actual election ballot, that's not his problem. Judge James Robert Redford added that the Michigan Secretary of State cannot make this decision herself because the judge thinks the 14th Amendment is a political matter, which will be interesting for him the next time a defendant in his court invokes the 5th Amendment, and he says the judge can't hold that against him because it's a political matter. And now, of course, we are awaiting the ruling on the Colorado 14th case by Judge John Paul Newman. No, I made that up. And Jack Smith's team had only a few thoughts on the D.C. Appeals Court staying Judge Tanya Chutkan's gag order on him. It filed its answer as it was supposed to yesterday. The answer is 67 pages long. The hearing is Monday. There is a lot of textbook legal stuff in there, but once again, there is the undeniable reassurance that Smith and his team just ain't kidding around. Not only did they tell the three-judge panel that our Hitler is, quote, implicitly but unmistakably encouraging his supporters to act against the very people he targets, unquote, but the Smith associate, Cecil Van de Vender, provided them with three comparisons to the prominence, if not the exact specifics, of the Trump case from the prosecution's point of view. Three comparisons. The trial of the Oklahoma City bomber McVeigh, the trial of the 9/11 plotter Moussaoui, and the trial of the Boston Marathon bomber Tsarnaev. McVeigh, Moussaoui, the Boston Marathon bomber, and Trump. I never thought I would say this about the prosecution of Trump, but while I applaud the comparison, and especially the seriousness with which Smith and Van de Vender and the others are taking this, it would never have occurred to me in a million years to invoke those four names together, and frankly, it leaves me breathless and grateful. A boxing tripleheader at Bicameral Square Garden, and it's largely being treated that way as a moronic joke. And it does make the participants look moronic. And it's not a coincidence that they, Congressman Jamie Comer and Tim Burchett and Kevin McCarthy and Senator Marquayne Mullen, are all Republicans. And the most common reaction was, I guess men are just too emotional to be leaders. If you missed all this, Senator Mullen wanted to throw hands with a Teamsters boss because the Teamsters boss wrote mean tweets about him. He wanted to fight him on the Senate floor. Congressman Burchett claims Congressman McCarthy elbowed him in the kidneys. McCarthy says he knew nothing about it. Then audio tape appeared in which it was clear the alleged perpetrator, McCarthy, was aware it happened as it happened. Plus, it sure sounds like alleged victim Burchett took the equivalent of a soccer dive. And Comer got mad when Congressman Jared Moskowitz noted the similarities between financial exchanges between Comer and his brother and President Biden and his brother, which Comer is now in like his 9th month of trying to turn into a thing. So Comer called Moskowitz a smurf, and he called Congressman Dan Goldman Mr. Trust Fund, and he started cussing, and he had to be brought back to this planet by the ranking member of the committee. And a mighty roar went up from the crowd, and we all had a good time. And then the serious side to this became all too apparent. Only some of his thugs in the House would actually start thugging while Trump's lawyers and his defenders continue the charade that our Hitler is not trying to normalize political violence as an acceptable component of American society, that he's not trying to get somebody to kill Jack Smith, that he's not trying to get somebody to kill any Democrat or any liberal. Trump can process only two things, money and violence. Everything else that he speaks about is just him doing a very practiced impression of human emotions and human interactions. So from the beginning, he has talked about beating up hecklers and shooting people on Fifth Avenue and inspiring violent attempts to overthrow the government, and of course, invoking the Insurrection Act so he can get the army to shoot civilian protesters. And before you wonder, this is too cliched. Pacifist liberals tut-tutting the big bad, compulsively violent fascists. Maybe we're doing too much here? Nope. Senator Markwayne Mullin himself went right from threatening a union boss with violence, itself a kind of short-sighted strategic decision, according to history. Went right from that on to Fox News, where he insisted, quote, "This isn't anything new," because Andrew Jackson had duels, and, quote, "There's been canings before in the Senate, too. Maybe we should bring some of that back, keep people from thinking they're so tough, because if we have some type of respect, because we know there's going to be consequences for your actions," unquote. And then, on Newsmax, Mullin went, somehow, even more pro-political violence.
Are there any actual Senate rules that if two consenting adults want to duke it out? I mean, we had a United States congressman pull a tooth on the House floor once. There's no rules about that. Could you guys go bare knuckle if you wanted to? Just no rules.
Well, we looked into the rules, and you used to be able to cane. You got to remember President Andrew Jackson challenged 9 guys to a duel and won 9 times. In a White House dinner one time, a guy was mouthing him at the end of the table. Jackson jumped up, literally ran across the table and knocked the guy out. And so at the end of the day, there is precedence for it if that's what someone wants to do.
A, Markwayne, the word is precedence, not presence, genius. And B, those aren't precedents. And C, if you Republicans want to start duels among yourselves, well, that's one solution. Apart from the projection here by Markwayne, two important things are also clear. He is unmistakably advocating for the resumption of fistfights, duels, and assaults with deadly weapons in the House and in the Senate. Exactly the Trump idea. Maybe we should just bring back violence. I'll note in passing that if we simply resolved everything that goes to the House or Senate by violence, we wouldn't need the House or the Senate, would we? But secondly, the historical illiteracy of this moron Mullin is astonishing. When he says there's been canings before in the Senate, too, he is evidently unaware that he is referring to May 22nd, 1856, when the South Carolina Congressman Preston Brooks went into the Senate, went to the desk of Senator Charles Sumner of Massachusetts, abused Sumner verbally, and as Senator Sumner was only beginning to stand up, the cowardly Brooks suddenly began to beat him on the head with a gold-headed cane. After a dozen blows, Sumner began to collapse towards the Senate floor. Brooks caught him, held him up, and continued to beat him with the cane while a second congressman stopped others who tried to rescue Senator Sumner. I am hoping Senator Mullin is just ignorant here, because the other option is he knows the story of Congressman Brooks and Senator Sumner and why Brooks attacked him. And he knows that the caning they used to have in the Senate, and maybe we should bring some of that back, was made by Congressman Brooks in defense of slavery. Associate yourself with that cause, asshole. The caning of Senator Sumner was perhaps the low point for any dignity in American politics, until we elected Trump, that is. It also changed history. That Sumner was nearly beaten to death in the Senate at his own desk because he opposed slavery erased any remaining sense among anti-slavery men of all parties and all states that they might still resolve that issue peaceably. Sumner's speech that had so enraged Brooks was printed, and 1 million copies were distributed in a nation of just 30 million residents. It wasn't as this boorish idiot Senator Mullen thinks, some kind of method to, quote, keep people from thinking they're so tough. It hastened the Civil War, moron. And on a personal level, Senator Sumner was unable to fully resume his duties for 2 years, by which time Congressman Brooks was dead. He had died of a tracheal infection that essentially strangled him slowly. But sure, Mark Twain, let's have more of this on the Senate floor, because you can't stand up to mean tweets.
After you left here, you got pretty excited about the keyboard. In fact, you tweeted at me 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times. And let me read what the last one said. It said, greedy CEO who pretends like he's self-made. Sir, I wish you was in the truck with me when I was building my plumbing company. Myself and my wife was running the office because I sure remember working pretty hard and long hours. Pretends like he's self-made. What a clown. Fraud. Always has been, always will be. Quit the tough guy act in these Senate hearings. You know where to find me. Any place, anytime, cowboy. Sir, this is a time, this is a place. If you want to run your mouth, we can be two consenting adults. We can finish it here.
Okay, that's fine. Perfect.
You want to do it now?
I'd love to do it right now.
Well, stand your butt up then.
You stand your butt up.
Oh, hold on.
Big guy.
No, stop it.
Is that your solution every
Hold it. No, sit down.
Oh, you're a clown.
Sit down. Look at you. You know, you're a United States Senator. Sit down.
Active.
Oh, okay.
Sit down, please.
All right.
Can I respond, Mr.
Hold it. If
Hold
we
on.
can, no,
This is
I have
what
the
he
mic.
said.
I'm sorry.
This is
hold
what
it.
he said.
You'll have your time.
Okay.
Can I respond?
Oh, no, you can't.
Yes, that's the voice of reason, Chairman Bernie Sanders, reminding both Teamsters President Sean O'Brien and Senator Mark Twain Mullen.
You filthy bully, you filthy guy! I'll take you out of the law, hey! You war mustering bully!
Gentlemen, you can't fight in here. This is the war room.
Don't tell anybody where I got that. Over in the House, there was contact, but to collapse back into my sports days, there reigns the open question, was it no harm, no foul? I'll play this out of sequence. The first clip will be ex-Speaker Kevin McCarthy denying the charge that he had elbowed Congressman Tim Burchett in the kidney as they passed in a House hallway, and McCarthy denying that he even knew that Burchett was claiming that had happened.
I did not run and hit the guy. I did not kidney punch him. I did not shoot anything like that.
You didn't shove him.
No. We're walking through. You were at HC5, right? You guys line up along the way there. It was Bruce Wester and I walking out. He must have been interviewing somebody. I didn't know it was him or something. I guess our elbows hit as I walked by. I didn't punch anybody.
Did he come after you?
No. Yeah, well, I guess it happened because when I was walking back further, I don't say somebody was interviewing me or talking to me, and he comes running up like, why did you hit me or something like that? I said, I don't know what you're talking about. I didn't even know something transpired.
But reporters who witnessed this said it looked like there was plenty of room for you to walk and that you intentionally hit him.
There is, okay, not a place. Show me a reporter who saw that. Call Bruce Westerman. Okay, well, ask Bruce Westerman. No, I did not go up. If I would hit somebody, they would know I hit them.
Doesn't seem like very much McCarthy said in there was true. Congressman Ken Buck later said McCarthy and lying were, quote, like peanut butter and jelly. And boy, is that imagery a sign of how far the House has fallen. Former Congressman Adam Kinzinger said McCarthy had deliberately shouldered him twice on Capitol grounds. On the other hand, Congressman Burchett later said McCarthy hit him from behind with a, quote, clean shot in the kidneys, and it was a sucker punch, and hours later he was still in pain. Oh, my aching kidneys. Then we got to hear the fracas as captured on audio by NPR reporter Claudia Grisales. And it's odd, but listen, it doesn't sound like Burchett was suffering a lot, or at all, or even a little bit. In fact, at first, he seems to be dismissing this as a friendly joke. At first.
It sounds like it went back and forth. And
I think it went all right. Yeah. Sorry, Kevin. Didn't mean to elbow. Why'd you elbow me in the back, Kevin?
I know. I felt so bad.
Hey, Kevin, you got any guts? Jerk.
Has he done that
You got no guts. You didn't so. They sat there and the reporter said it right there. What kind of chicken move is that? You're pathetic, man. You are so pathetic. What a jerk. You need security, Kevin.
And then there was Comer versus Jared Moskowitz with a cameo by Dan Goldman. As Congressman Moskowitz texted me about Comer, I think he needs a mental health day. As I replied, I think he needs a mental health week.
I'm happy to yield you some of my time today, Mr. Chairman, because I think you owe it to the American people to explain why you've gone on Fox News and told people that while the president was out of office, he had a loan with his brother, and in a way they were evading taxes. It has come out in the public that you also do business with your brother with potential loans. And so since you have framed that and manipulated that with the American people, that Joe Biden did something wrong when he wasn't in office, I just would like to know if you would like to use some of my time.
I would love it.
Okay.
You retweeted that story. Completely false. I've never loaned my brother one penny. My father, who was a dentist, had some farmland. He died, and my brother couldn't afford, he wanted to sell it, but he wanted to keep it in the family, so I bought it from my brother. That story that you tweeted also said I had a shell company. That is bullshit. But you and Goldman, who is Mr. Trust Fund, continue to try to
reclaiming my time.
No, I'm not going to give you your time back. We can stop the clock. You all continue to, you look like a Smurf here just going around and all this stuff. Now listen.
Mr. Chairman, I'm
going to tell you something.
Hold on. If we're not on time,
we spew disinformation.
You have gone on TV and said the president did something illegal. You're doing stuff with your brother. The American people have the same questions. Why should they believe you? Why should they believe you? Why should they believe you? There's a different rule for the president. There's a different rule for you. Why should they believe what you're saying, Mr. Chairman? Why? You go on Fox News and say loans and deals are a way to evade taxes. We don't know that's what you're doing or not. We don't know. We have no idea. We're supposed to take your word for it. But when the president
you've
says
already
something,
been proven a liar, Mr. Moskowitz.
What's that?
You've already been proven a liar.
Who's proven me a liar? You?
Yes.
Your word means nothing, Mr. Chairman.
Go to my hometown. There's a camera crew there today, an opposition research crew there today.
Mr. Chairman, this seems to have gotten under your skin.
I'll pay for your ticket.
I think the American people have lots of questions, Mr. Chairman, and perhaps you should sit maybe for a deposition.
I will be happy. I will sit with Hunter Biden and Jim Biden, and we can go over our LLC.
That'll be great. I'll make sure the ranking member is happy that you'll sit at a table.
Mr. Chairman, I make a point of order that we should return to regular order.
I also suggested to Congressman Moskowitz that the next time Chairman Comer loses his spit like that, Moskowitz should ask him about his college girlfriend and her insistence that he beat her up. Because no, Senator Mullen, the duels and the canings, maybe we shouldn't bring them back. But maybe if you are in favor of them, or like McCarthy and Burchett and Comer, you're ready to resort to them, maybe we need to get you out of any position of responsibility immediately, because those things are the furthest things from being responsible. Also of interest here, Jamie Dimon, billionaire CEO of J.P. Morgan Chase, has figured out who the next president should be. Jamie has spoken. No, it's not Jamie Dimon. Because compared to who he picked, President Jamie Dimon would be a good idea. That's next. This is Countdown.
This is Countdown with Keith Olbermann.
Still ahead of us on Countdown, I was just explaining this defining moment of my younger life the other day. It is the answer to the question, why should you have listened when Mom used to say, never run for a train, there will always be another one? It happened only 43 years and 3 months ago, so I'll be getting over it any day now. Actually, no, probably not. I won't be getting over it any day now. Things I promised not to tell coming up. First, time for the daily roundup of the miscreants, morons, and Dunning-Kruger effect specimens who constitute today's worst persons in the world, Sonny. Worse. Carlos Mendoza, introduced by the New York Mets yesterday as their newest manager, by their newest executive. I have nothing against him. I have to confess that until last week, I had no idea who he was. He was a coach for the New York Yankees. There are like 400 coaches in baseball now. There used to be 96. I've lost track. I actually used to be the expert on the history of coaches in baseball. I had a book published researching the history of the coaches in baseball. Anyway, new Mets managers tend to be star-crossed. Sometimes it's because the Mets and their new managers are too conscious of the crosstown Yankees, too worried about them and their fans. Sometimes it's other reasons. Mickey Callaway, new in 2018, turned out to be a serial sexual harasser. Carlos Beltran, hired away from the Yankees to succeed him, did not make it to opening day before getting fired. Luis Rojas, who succeeded Beltran, made almost no impression at all. Then there was Buck Showalter, who replaced Rojas, and Buck Showalter used to be the manager of the Yankees. Now Mendoza has continued the tradition. He has begun his Mets career by explaining he will be wearing uniform number 28 with the Mets because, quote, I'll lead the Mets to a world championship before the Yankees get their 28th ring. Possibly that's a funny line on some other day, other than the day you start on the job, but why are you feeding into this mindset that it's about who does better, the underachieving Mets or the even more underachieving Yankees? Besides which, because I'll lead the Mets to a world championship before the Yankees get their 28th ring, the way these two teams are going, that could easily still mean it will not happen before the year 2059. Worser, Russell Brand. Yep, more accusations, 2 more, just at the BBC, which makes 5 of them there, the BBC which he left 15 years ago. Brand insists it was always consensual. I once testified against somebody in a sexual harassment scandal at one of my employers, and an expert in the field, including the field of sexual assault, said that the reason the defense always is it was consensual is that the perpetrators believe or convince themselves that the victim's lack of consent is its own form of consent. And after all, they also think, well, I consented, because they're sexually violent criminals who should be in prison. But the worst, Jamie Dimon, the CEO of J.P. Morgan Chase. Axios reports that he has held private conversations by phone with a presidential candidate about the global economy because he thinks this one presidential candidate could, quote, bring the country together. And he thinks that this one candidate understands the role of how business and government should work together to rule people. The candidate Jamie Dimon picks is Nikki Haley. Nikki Haley, who, as I have noted before, is one of the least realistic people I have ever encountered. Wait, it gets worse. Dimon thinks Haley would make a great candidate and a great president if only she could get past Trump for the Republican nomination. By the same token, Jamie Dimon could fly to the moon if he had an Atlas V rocket instead of an ass. Jamie Dimon! Forbes estimates his personal worth at $1,600,000,000, which reminds me, you ever get the feeling that everybody with real money got it entirely by accident? Today's worst person in the world! So finally to our number one story on the countdown on my favorite topic, me, and things I promised not to tell. Although truth be told, I have been telling this story now for 42 years. On Sunday, the 24th of August, 1980, I learned what Mom meant when she had said, never run for a train, there'll always be another one. Because I didn't know what it meant, I nearly killed myself, I permanently altered my health, and I put myself on a path towards meeting the great Dr. Renee Richards. I was sleeping late in my relatively new and tiny studio apartment on 55th Street in Manhattan, apartment 10F, when above me, 11F started making noise, like pounding on the floor. And now it's 8:30 Sunday morning, and I'm awake, and I'm not due at my job as a radio sportscaster until about 2, and I think, well, I'm up. Oh, the Dodgers are playing the Mets at Shea. I can go do my other job as a semi-professional photographer and go shoot the Dodgers and still make it to work on time. So I pack my semi-professional, emphasis on the semi-photographer's bag, and drag myself out on the subway and get to Shea Stadium around 11:30 a.m., and there's nobody there. No Dodgers players, no Mets players, nobody but the groundskeepers. And as the minutes pass, I'm beginning to calculate when I have to leave in order to not be late to my job back in Manhattan. Weekend life in New York City in 1980 might as well have been 1910. I tell people this, they do not believe me. But when I worked weekends the next year in Times Square, I used to call into my newsroom from a payphone on Fifth Avenue and say, okay, I'm going to Arby's today. Who wants what? Or McDonald's or Burger King or wherever, because our office was in Times Square, and on weekends, there were no restaurants open in Times Square. You could not get food in Times Square on weekends. Today, the same 4-square block area probably has 50 restaurants and fast food places. So the train back to Manhattan from Shea Stadium in Queens ran once every half an hour on that Sunday in August of 1980, and as I looked at my watch, I realized I should have left the field 3 or 4 minutes ago. If you went out the press entrance and exit at Shea Stadium, you could see the train approaching the elevated station out behind right field, and if you had just seen it, if it had just become visible, and if you then ran your fastest, you could make it to the viaduct that crossed the parking lot and led you up towards the station platform. And if you could get your subway token out and into the turnstile slot with one fluid overhand motion, and if you kept running all the time, you could just make the train. If you didn't, you would be waiting half an hour, unless maybe the next train was late or on fire somewhere. Sure enough, as I got out of the ballpark, I could see the Manhattan-bound train just appearing at the horizon. I was 21, my knees still worked, and I ran. And I got into the viaduct, and I got the token out of my pocket, and I got it into the slot like Daryl Dawkins doing a tomahawk slam. And I not only made the train, but I made it by so much that I styled. I celebrated. I congratulated myself. I was guilty of premature jocularity. I could have just slowed to a triumphant jog and gotten a seat, huffing and sweaty, but eminently satisfied and on time for work. But no, I decided to make an exultant, joyful leap. The next thing I registered was the loudest sound I had ever or have since ever heard, as if 600 gongs had gone off simultaneously, or a dozen church bells, or every alarm clock that had ever awakened me from the deepest of sleeps. Something like this, but inside your head. Bong! What had happened was, forgetting that I was no longer 6 feet tall, as I had been even 2 years before, but was now just under 6'4", my leap had ended with me slamming my forehead on the flat metal bar just above the train doorway. An inch higher, I might have blinded myself. The bar, an inch above the doorway, is in fact, as I found out later, the thickest piece of metal on a New York City subway train. As it was, my momentum carried me safely into the train. I hit the floor. I saw my sunglasses go flying off and rattling down towards the back of the train like a plastic rat. I heard the train doors close. I felt the blood on my head and in my hair, and I crawled up onto the plastic bench seating behind me. The mass gong sound continued in my head, and my first cogent thought was to see the blood on the train floor and think, oh, I have spilled blood all over their train, and I don't have anything to clean it up with. Similar nonsense continued to bounce around my concussed size 8 noggin for seconds, maybe minutes. It was beginning to really hurt, and of more practical import, the bleeding had not really stopped. At this point, an older woman sitting more or less across from me handed me a small packet. It was a wet wipe. I mumbled thanks, opened it, dabbed it on my forehead for a second, and was surprised to find it instantly inundated with blood. This was the first time it occurred to me that I might be in real trouble on the number 7 local train to Grand Central and Times Square. Apparently, this thought occurred simultaneously to the woman with the wet wipes and to her friend. "I think you're kind of hurt," one of them said to me. "Let's get you to the hospital. There's one a couple blocks from the next stop." Now, understand this situation. The New York of 1980, and particularly the subways of 1980, were not nice places. 2 years later, I took a rush hour train to my job at CNN at the World Trade Center and was annoyed to find one guy who had sprawled himself over 3 seats with a newspaper covering his face. 9 hours later, when I went home, I got onto a train and saw the same guy with the same newspaper on the same seats, because it was the same train, and more importantly, because he was dead. Anyway, it was now around 12:45 of a Sunday afternoon. If it had been night, or indeed certain other times of the day, or on other train lines, I would have simply been the easiest mugging victim in New York history. Somebody could have knocked me over and taken my wallet with next to no effort. Hell, they could have asked me for my wallet, and I was so dazed I probably would have said, "Sure, have a nice day. Got any wet wipes?" Instead, I met not one but 2 good Samaritans who knew where the hospitals were in a part of town I could barely find on a map. Sure enough, they helped me to my feet, walked me down the steps and to the 2 blocks or so that separated us from Elmhurst Hospital. And when I reassured them I was clear-headed enough to get into the emergency room by myself, they wished me luck, and they would not even accept my offer of 2 tokens to get them back on the subway. There should be a monument to these 2 women somewhere. If the New York City subways of 1980 were scary, the emergency rooms of its hospitals were something out of a Brian De Palma film. I think there were a couple of dozen people in the ER. I remember one of them asking me how I got so bloody, and I explained, and he said, "You should go ahead of me." And he opened his windbreaker to show a blood-covered shirt, and he added, "The bullet only grazed me." I know I waited about 2 hours. During that time, I had a singular experience which has informed my understanding of concussions and traumatic brain injury ever since. The desk nurse asked me for the name of a contact, preferably a family member. I gave my father's name, Theodore. Then she asked me for my full name, and when I went to say it, I could not remember my middle name. Could not remember my middle name. Keith, I got. Olbermann, I got. That was it. My middle name is also Theodore. I could remember Theodore, my dad, but not Theodore, my middle name. That is how fragile your brain really is. Think of that the next time you see somebody get clocked in a sporting event. There was some comic relief. I called into my office at United Press International's audio network and explained to the news editor, a veteran named Ed Cairns, the most dapper man in radio history who looked like the actor Ray Collins from Citizen Kane. I told Ed I had just sort of almost, killed myself on the subway coming in from Queens, and I really didn't know when or if I would be at work. About 45 minutes after that conversation, the desk nurse started shouting my name, and I thought, okay, I'm finally going to be brought in to see a doctor. No, it was Ed Cairns calling from UPI. My bosses were all very sorry that I was wounded, he said, but there was nobody available to fill in for me, so when could they expect me to be in the office? I explained I did not know that since I was technically still bleeding to death. 45 minutes more passed, and again the nurse summoned me and said there was a phone call, and this time I was sure it was my dad. Keith, Ed Cairns again at UPI. He explained that my boss now said that they would bring in the guy who was supposed to do the next morning's sportscast, my college friend Peter Schacknow, but they expected me to do his shift starting at 4:30 in the morning. I explained to Ed that I would try, but that honestly, I didn't know where I was or what time it was now. 2 nice ladies had mentioned the name of the hospital, but I really wasn't remembering too well. Plus, I was still bleeding to death. Needless to say, I did not bleed to death. I survived. It was a severe concussion, but it only took a stitch and a half to actually close that wound, and the ER doctor and the nurses were outstanding, and they gave me easy-to-remember instructions plus a note indicating that I should rest for at least 48 hours just in case Ed Cairns showed up at my apartment. No offense to Ed. They told me what symptoms to expect, how to prepare for them, and when they would stop. And they stopped like one day earlier. It was a potential disaster that turned into a nothing burger. Or so I thought. 2 years later, I was at the original Louis Armstrong Stadium covering the 1982 U.S. Tennis Open. On the other side of the same elevated subway station where I had run into the train. Going there always actually made me laugh. Until the afternoon of Saturday, September 11th, 1982. I was watching the women's final, covering it for CNN, Chris Everett over Hannah Mandlikova, and swinging my head from side to side as one does to follow the tennis action from over here to over there to over here to over there, as I had swung my head from side to side for the preceding 12 days of the tournament. Then I swung to the right, but my left eye kept looking to the left. The old Marty Feldman thing, reversed, crossed eyes. That hurt worse than hitting the train had. I could barely stand any light. I often had to keep my hand in front of my eyes. I rushed to my optometrist Monday morning, and he started to laugh. This happened to you during the U.S. Open? I said, yes. Why are you laughing at me? He said, I'm going to send you to the best muscle ophthalmologist I've ever met. I said, so why are you laughing at me? He said, you don't know who that is? I said, no, I let my knowledge of the muscle ophthalmology rankings slip. Why are you laughing at me? He said, the best muscle ophthalmologist I've ever met is Dr. Renee Richards, the transsexual tennis player. I said, I don't care who you're sending me to. I'm in trouble here. If they can fix this, I don't care who you're sending me to. My train accident was so far in my past that when I got in to see Dr. Richards the next morning, I didn't even think to mention it in my patient history. It didn't matter. 30 seconds of staring into my eyes through a wall-sized phoropter, and Renee Richards said, when exactly did you hit your head? August or September of 1980? I was stunned. I did hit my head in 1980. August 24th. She made a clicking noise of satisfaction. I've heard of this before, but I've never seen it. You couldn't do this again in a million years. The good news is that muscle problem with the eyes, that's just muscle exhaustion. We can fix that with a thing that costs $1.98. The bad news is when you hit your head, most of the damage must have been absorbed by your inner ear. If you want to fix that, you'll need brain surgery. I don't recommend brain surgery. Dr. Renee Richards showed me the muscle exercises that cost $1.98 that fixed my reverse crossed eyes. They felt better immediately. I still do the exercises. I did them earlier today. Then Renee Richards said, so you're a sports reporter, it says here? Listen, my next patient isn't due for half an hour. You should rest anyway after my exam. Let's talk about sports reporting. Renee Richards was an expert. Her transition had been outed by a sportscaster. Tucker Carlson's father, if you can believe that. I can believe it. Because she had been a man, when she played in the U.S. Open as a woman, she had become almost instantaneously the most famous tennis player in the world. Then she became Martina Navratilova's coach. I learned more from her in that first half hour of conversation about the ethics of reporting than I had in all of my previous life experiences combined. Plus, she was a gas. Renee Richards was hilarious. She was self-effacing. She was a great doctor. And to me, she was the definition of courage. And she, I am proud to say, is still my friend. All because I did not know what Mom meant when she said, don't run for a train, there'll always be another one. The other phrase I never really understood till then was breakneck speed. Oh, and there is one more punchline here. If the name of that hospital that the two Good Samaritans took me to, Elmhurst Hospital, sounds vaguely familiar, it should. It was ground zero when COVID-19 hit, when the pandemic had its hand around New York City's throat. The worst hit community was Elmhurst in Queens, and the worst hit hospital was Elmhurst Hospital. They were in desperate need at that point of ventilators, so I knew what I had to do. You could buy them for cash, legally, so I got 2 ventilators. I had them delivered. One for each of the ladies who helped me to get off the damn train that day. Man, did that hurt. I've done all the damage I can do here. Thank you for listening. Countdown has come to you from the Vin Scully Studios at the headquarters of the Olbermann Broadcasting Empire in New York. It's my suit closet. Countdown musical directors Brian Ray and John Philip Chanel arranged, produced, and performed most of our music. Well, I like to be honest with you. You take the time to listen to this, I should tell you that I'm broadcasting from a suit closet. The best acoustics of any studio I have ever worked in my life. And good suits. Mr. Chanel handled orchestration and keyboards. Mr. Ray was on the guitars, the bass, and the drums, and it was produced by TKO Brothers. See, TKO Brothers is just a play on my initials, which are KTO. Brian Ray thought this up. We have to have some producer for some musical legal reason, or I don't know. Eric Clapton told him to do that. I don't know what happened. Other music, including other Beethoven tunes, arranged and performed by the group No Horns Allowed. I met those guys in Central Park. They used to play over by the carousel when it wasn't running during the pandemic. I don't know where all of these annotations are coming from. The sports music, courtesy of ESPN Inc., was written by Mitch Warren Davis. It's called the Olbermann Theme from ESPN2. That's from the show that debuted 10 years ago last month. God. Our satirical and pithy musical comments are by Nancy Faust, the best baseball stadium organist ever. Our announcer today was my friend Jonathan Banks, not only from Better Call Saul and Breaking Bad, but he's also in Airplane. Everything else was pretty much my fault. Next countdown for this, the 1,044th day since Dementia J. Trump's first attempted coup against the democratically elected government of the United States. Convict him now while we still can. The next scheduled countdown is tomorrow. Bulletins as the news warrants. Till then, I'm Keith Olbermann, or whatever my name is. I'm Keith Olbermann. Good morning, good afternoon, good night, and good.